Some people will tell you it's fairly easy to take the Christian worldview and in terms of it whittle down atheistic or materialistic worldviews to show that they are internally inconsistent or cannot provide the preconditions of intelligibility or what have you. But there are different religions. And so I tried to explain that the various religions of the world can be divided into three categories. You have religions of transcendent mysticism like Hinduism, which is easily refuted in terms of its own story. That is, Hindus are their own worst enemies when they try to defend their faith. In fact, if they could defend their faith, they'd have to give up their worldview in order to do that. And then you have religions of eminent moralism. A number of religions that have their earthly authorities, and these always turn out to be moralistic religions, telling you there's a code of behavior by which you need to live, or the reason why you have trouble or suffering in this world because you're not living up to that. These religions don't live up to their own standards because it's one thing to tell people they're not living up to a code of behavior, and it's another thing to provide a way of escape from the guilt as well as the personal pollution and bondage of disobedience. And they don't provide that, and so again they're inadequate, materially inadequate. And then I told you thirdly that there are religions of the world which are counterfeits of Christianity. That isn't to say that they are Christian, it's to say that they are modeled after, or they ape, they try to imitate the Christian religion, or they are dependent upon it in some historical or conceptual way. Mormonism is an example of polytheistic Christian counterfeits. We have a Unitarian example of counterfeit Christianity in Islam, and that's where we take up our lecture this afternoon. Most people who think that there's an alternative to the Christian approach to apologetics will seize upon Islam as their counterexample because, one, Islam has a personal God. Secondly, Islam is monotheistic. And thirdly, Islam has a religious book that they say is a revelation from their personal God. And in those respects, then, it seems that Islam is a effective, or at least deceptively persuasive counterfeit of Christianity. Please keep in mind that Islam dates from almost 600 years after the inception of Christianity. Muhammad was born, Muhammad who claims to be the prophet of Allah, the one living and true God. Allah was born too then, I guess, but Muhammad was born in 570 A.D. And he lived in the midst of polytheistic Arabs, and this seemed to distress his moralistic soul. When he was 15 years old, he married a wealthy woman. He began getting revelations from a spirit. He went to a cave and tried to get rid of these voices in his head. He was afraid that he was being afflicted by demons. He took it to be satanic. His wife convinced him that he should submit to these revelations. Eventually he dictated them, and in their dictated form they became surahs, or what we would call chapters, of the Quran. It was about the year 620, I believe, that Muhammad died. Muhammad presented a religion that clashed with his polytheistic culture. He said there is but one God, Allah. He had a very fatalistic view of the world. He said Allah controls everything, there is no free will. And he taught a moralistic understanding of how one gets right with Allah. During his life, when he tried to propagate this faith, he felt it would be good to win over the Jews and the Christians to his side, and so you will find many favorable things said about Judaism and even Christianity in the Quran. Particularly, the Quran says that a previous revelation of Allah is found in the Pentateuch, the Law of Moses, as well as in the Psalms of David and the Gospel of Jesus. I think Muhammad will regret trying to make that commercial appeal to Jews and Christians, because this will provide us all we need to refute his alleged revelation. But anyway, later when Jews and Christians resisted him, he became very upset about that, and the Quran does contain endorsements of killing people who will not submit to the word of the Prophet of Allah. And so throughout its history, Islam has been characterized by a violent form of evangelism, what we call evangelism by the sword. A couple of years ago when I debated a man who was probably the best-known Islamic scholar on the West Coast, he wanted to make it very clear that the Quran does not support violence and warfare. This has become something of an embarrassment to those who want to, in the 20th century, propagate Islam. And so you're going to see, if you have any Muslim friends or you do any evangelism with Muslims, that they will continually try to reinterpret or to mitigate the actual teaching of the Quran. It is something of a social embarrassment these days. But for all of that, we still have to take into account the claim that the Quran is the revelation of the one and true God. What are we going to do with that? Before I tell you, real quickly, because most people don't know what Islam is, except it's a social movement in our country, Islam stands for 5 doctrines. 1, Allah is the true God, the one and only true God. Secondly, Allah has sent many prophets to guide men, including Moses, David, and Jesus, but Muhammad is the last and the greatest of these prophets of God. Thirdly, they believe that of the 4 inspired books, the Pentateuch, the Psalms, the Gospel of Jesus, and the Quran, obviously the Quran is the most important. But Muslims will tell you that Jews and Christians are still people of the book. They do have a verbal revelation from God, although they have corrupted it, and the Quran has come to correct these corruptions. Fourth, Islam is characterized by a belief in many intermediary deities, or angels, demons. There's a great emphasis upon angelology. Fifth, they believe there's a final day of judgment coming. All men will be resurrected, will be sent to heaven or to hell, and this will be based upon their works. Heaven is described as a place of sensuous delight and gratification, primarily for the males. The descriptions of heaven in the Quran are somewhat humorous. If I were a female, I'm not sure I'd want to go. You're going to end up serving us guys for the rest of eternity, and in a lot of different ways. We might consider it a form of supernatural pimping, but hey, if that's what Allah said, that's what Allah said. Okay. And although this is not considered one of the orthodox or central doctrines of Islam, it is pervasively, it's a doctrine that's found pervasively in Islamic theology, and that's the doctrine of Kismet. You may have heard of that. Kismet is fate. The notion that there is really no free will, and Allah controls everything that takes place, from the movement of the leaves on the tree down to every decision and every word that you will make, or every word you will speak. Okay, there are 5 pillars to being a Muslim. 5 pillars. I've given you their 5 basic doctrines plus Kismet. The 5 pillars are to recite Islam's creed. And Islam's creed is easy. It's not as though you have to memorize the larger catechism of the Westminster Divines. Here it is. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. That's it. Secondly, you must practice prayer 5 times a day, and that has to be prayer oriented toward Mecca, their capital. Thirdly, you must practice almsgiving as the highest form of good works. Fourthly, you must recognize and practice the month of fasting, Ramadan. That is not a form of noodles that you eat. That is They have an interesting version of fasting. If I weren't short on time, I'd love to talk about some of these things. Just like their view of heaven being rather sensuous and pimpish, their view of fasting amounts to, you're not supposed to eat when the sun is up. Now, you can gorge yourself when the sun is down, mind you, but when the sun is up, then you fast. But it's always physical fasting. You can drink anything you want when the sun is up. Fifthly, For everyone who is able, a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life is required. And then sixthly, I know we call these the 5 pillars, but the 6th pillar, it's always 5 plus 1. 5 doctrines plus 1, 5 pillars plus 1. The 6th pillar is jihad, the practice of holy war. When a particular Aman, a particular holy man, has a revelation from Allah to the effect that his people must defend themselves or must purge the earth of the scourge of satanic people like Christians or the United States or whatever it may be, then the Imam can call for holy war. And a particular version of holy war is putting a ban on an individual. Now that has happened in your own lifetime. You know that Salman Rushdie lives in hiding. He wrote something called the Satanic Verses, in which allegedly the Islamic religion is either mutilated or insulted. And for that reason, he now has a ban on his head. Any godly Muslim that runs across him not only may, that is, has permission to, but is under moral obligation to kill him. Okay. Again, that's one of those things where, you know, I have this debate with a Dr. Zadiki, and he's trying to make Islam, you know, urbane and 20th century, and we really believe in peace and all that sort of thing. And then something like this happens. It makes it so hard for these guys to debate. Okay. I only do that because I'm afraid that many of you are not aware of what the actual character of the teaching of the Quran is. You mustn't be led astray by those who say, well, you Christians have your Bible, the Muslims have the Quran, and it's just like a Mexican standoff. You know what a Mexican standoff is. Okay? Neither one of you are going to be refute or destroy each other, because everything you say they can counter, everything they say you can counter, and that's it. But what did I teach you about doing worldview apologetics? We don't simply look at bare or formal authority claims. It's like, I've got my Bible, I've got my God, his name is Jehovah, yay for my team. Okay, and so somebody else says, well, but we've got our God, his name is Allah, yay for our team, and now what do? No, we compare the actual content of our worldview to the actual content of the worldview presented by our Muslim friends. And so let's look at the Quran and find out something more about it. You need to be aware that the Quran claims to be a confirmation of the Old Testament law and the New Testament gospel, which is to say, as I already indicated earlier, telegraphed to you, when Muhammad attempted to appeal to Jews and Christians by saying that what he was saying is nothing but a continuation of Moses, David, and Jesus, he really gave himself a huge intellectual headache to deal with. Because if the Quran is the confirmation of previous revelation, and if that previous revelation teaches, as I've already told you in terms of talking to Mormons, if that previous revelation teaches that subsequent additional revelation must conform to what God has previously said, then all you need to do on the Quran's own basis to refute it is to show conflicts between what the Bible teaches and what the Quran teaches, and that is not difficult to do at all. Let me give you a few that are embarrassing. In Surah 19, what we call chapter 19 of the Quran, that deals with the virgin birth, we read Mary described as the sister of Aaron. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is described as the sister of Aaron. Now, you Old Testament scholars out there can figure out how that mistake was made. What is the name of the sister of Aaron? Miriam, right. So Muhammad, living in a pervasively oral culture, confused Mary with Miriam. And so this comes as a revelation of this perfect God, Allah. Well, it's a huge historical embarrassment. In fact, it's interesting to me when I have to write or debate on Muslim subjects, I always go back and check the latest Muslim scholars for the newest rendition of how they deal with that kind of embarrassment. According to the Quran, Jesus was not crucified. Come as a surprise? Jesus couldn't be crucified. He's a prophet of God. Actually, what took place is that Judas was substituted for Jesus, and people confused them. Yeah, right. Thirdly, and perhaps more importantly, the Quran says that it would be absolutely wrong to worship Jesus or to call him the Son of God. God cannot have a son. And so what you have in the Quran essentially is a denial of the deity of Jesus Christ. That's why I said that Islam is a Unitarian religion. They deny the Trinity. They say there's only one person that is God. And Jesus is not that one person. Jesus is just a prophet of God. And according to the Quran, anybody who says that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are each God is teaching polytheism, teaching three gods. Now, of course, that is not what's taught. That's not what the Bible teaches, because the Bible says there's but one God. The Shema of Israel, the confession of faith of Israel, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And that's what makes the development of the worship of Jesus in the New Testament so fascinating. It's monotheists who said Jesus is God. They didn't give up their monotheism, but they somehow believed that this one who had appeared in the flesh was the very God that they worshipped. Nevertheless, the Quran presents it differently. According to it, what we are saying is that there are three gods, and they utterly deny the deity of Jesus. All right, so let me put this all together. We just refuted the Quran, didn't we? And we didn't refute the Quran by saying, yay for our team, your team stinks, needs deodorant. What we said is, according to your teaching, Allah, the living and true God, has revealed himself already in the law, in the Psalms, in the Gospel, and what the Quran teaches conflicts with what we read in previous revelations, so the Quran cannot be a revelation of the living and true God. Now, if you were a Muslim, how would you try to get out of that fix? What do the Mormons do? That's an old trick. In fact, it's boring. It's so old. It turns out that when they said they honored the law, the Psalms, and the Gospel, what they really meant is the law, the Psalms, the Gospel as corrected by the Quran. Which is to say, it was rather deceptive to claim that that the Quran is continuous with these, because you really must use the Quran to go back and change them in order to say that there's really continuity. And so now the point is, you have to ask, do you have any manuscript evidence for your revisions of God's previous revelation? Guess how many they have? You don't need any fingers to count. 0. You know why? Because we Christians effectively have perverted the original revelation of God. There is no manuscript evidence they can appeal to. The only thing you can depend on now is the Quran to go back and correct it. Kind of tidy and convenient, don't you think? No evidence of this claim. Remember what I said about the Mormons when they said you must use the Book of Mormon and the Pearl of Great Price to correct previous revelation as we now have it? And again, I said, what is the manuscript evidence for that? It was the same number. It's called the empty set in math. There is no evidence. I didn't write it down here, but what's the first thing you look for when you're arguing with somebody who has contrary considerations or some reasoning against the faith? You look for arbitrariness. Exactly. And that's precisely the problem here. It's utterly arbitrary to make that claim. But let me tell you a little bit more about their arbitrariness. There may be a psychological explanation to help you with this. This comes up often. It came up when I debated Dr. Zadiki. Muslims will say, well, we have a superior revelation because ours doesn't have any variance in it, that is, any textual variance. Every copy of the Quran is identical with every other copy of the Quran. Now that in itself is overblown advertisement. It's just not true. But nevertheless, on that claim, what they're saying is, but you Christians, you have this Bible that has all these different texts, and there are all these different conflicts. Now they call them conflicts. Usually in scholarly circles, they're called variants. Nevertheless, is, I don't know what the number is, but 2,000-3,000 variants, between the text that we have of the Bible. And so then Muslims will present that to you. And if you've not done any reading in textual criticism, you may say, well, that is a little embarrassing. They've got this perfect textual tradition, and we've got these variants, which they call conflicts. When I debated Dr. Siddiqui, I invited him to present even one of those variants as a conflict, a doctrinal conflict. I said, name one doctrine of the Christian faith that is refuted or in which you have a contradiction presented in the textual traditions. Well, then he just wanted to remind me of the large number of variants, which is, of course, he didn't want to take the invitation. There are no conflicts in our in our textual traditions. They are only variant readings. Nevertheless, people say, what do I do about that? It does seem to be embarrassing. Well, you need to know that in the 4th or 5th caliphate, the caliphs were the leaders of the Muslims after Muhammad died, and in the 4th or 5th, the Caliphate of Oman, all versions of the Quran were collected, and variant readings were destroyed. That is to say, they made a recension of their text. They gathered everything they could, destroyed the variants, that is, they chose a particular tradition to be the one that will be the perfect one, and then they destroyed all the competition. And they did that, by the way, upon pain of death. If anyone would not turn variants, that person would be killed. And so I think what you need to point out is, well, of course, we could do a recension of the Bible, too. Everyone turn in their variant traditions, and if you don't, we'll kill you. And then we'll produce the miracle of the Bible with no variant readings. Actually, though it makes biblical study somewhat more complicated, I don't think it shakes anybody's faith or destroys the church in its life, but the fact that we have variants makes Bible study a little more difficult, but it is also a testimony to the historical, not reliability, but the authenticity of the Bible as a text. That is to say, we don't have the artificiality of having to go through and destroy any alternatives that come up. We know that when people copy things, they make mistakes. And yet, for all of that, God has done a wondrous job of preserving the biblical text. Okay, so when Muslims, let me come back to my main point now. When Muslims suggest that Christians really destroyed all the alternatives, and that's why the Quran is necessary to correct the theology of the Bible, my guess is that's just a form of projection. You all know in psychology what projection is? We have a tendency as human beings to project on other people our own sins and foibles, weaknesses, inadequacies. And since the Muslims are guilty of this very procedure, it's not surprising, I suppose, that that's what they foist on us. But again, what is the evidence for it? None. Okay, second problem with the Quran. Not only do we have these contradictions with previous revelation, but there are contradictions within the Quran as well. And here's the most important one. The Quran teaches that there is nothing in human experience that can be likened to Allah. Allah is so transcendent, so beyond the daily experience of human beings, that nothing in human experience can be likened to Him. Well, I guess, wait a minute, wait. I guess I couldn't say likened to Him because Him, her distinctions come from human experience, don't they? But on the other hand, we don't want to say likened to it because personal and impersonal distinctions come from human experience too. Well, it's just very difficult to say this, isn't it? It's worse than that. If nothing in human experience can be likened to Allah, then nothing in human language can be said, which is a fair comparison. If that is true, what follows from that? Some of you have been listening to much literary criticism today. You're falling asleep. What follows from this is nothing in human language can be said then of Allah, because everything in human language, being based upon human experience, is going to be inadequate. Okay, and then what follows from that? If nothing in human language is adequate to speak of Allah, what is the Quran? Exactly. The Quran could not be what it claimed to be if what the Quran says is true. Now, that's pretty tidy self-contradiction. That's why I want to go over it again. Quran says nothing in human experience can be likened to Allah. But then, in that case, no human language is adequate to speak of Allah, because all human language is based upon human experience. In which case, There can't be any revelation in human language of Allah, and yet that's what the Quran claims to be. So if the Quran is true, the Quran must be false. Kind of like the Barber of Seville. That's probably what you thought of right away, right? You know, the Barber of Seville shaves all and only those who don't shave themselves. And so the question naturally is, this is one of those paradoxes of self-reference, has the Barber of Seville shaved himself? What did I tell you? The Barber of Seville shaves only those who don't shave themselves, and he shaves all of the people who don't shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, since he shaves all those who don't shave themselves, then he does shave himself. So if he doesn't, he does. But if he does shave himself, since he shaves only those who don't shave themselves, if he does shave himself, he doesn't shave himself. So if he does, he doesn't, and if he doesn't, he does. And so it is with the Quran. If it is true, it is false. If it is true, what the Quran tells us about Allah, then the Quran could not be what it claims to be. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip the rest of the refutation. I think we've said enough to see what a worldview comparison would look like. We're not just saying, you've got your God named Allah, we have our God named Jehovah, and what can we say? We say, no, what does your worldview say, what does our worldview say, and which will salvage rationality, which has contradictions, things of that nature. But there's also a material weakness, in fact it's a very great weakness, in Islam, and I chose in my debate, although what I just brought up I used as my final hammer blow against my opponent, but my presentation was primarily to this effect, partly because the college had decided to have a debate between all three peoples of the book, so I had to debate simultaneously an Orthodox Jew and an Islamic scholar, and I won't do that again, not because it can't be done, it's just that it's too unwieldy. You want to corner these people, you not let them out, and so when you got two opponents, it becomes fairly difficult. But here's what I thought I would do. Since the Orthodox Jew grants the law of Moses, and the Islamic scholar grants the law of Moses, I said, okay, well then we'll just do our debate on the basis of the law of Moses. And so I offered what is a Christian interpretation of such things as circumcision, animal sacrifice, the temple, so forth. And I just called on the Jew and the Muslim to give their alternative interpretations. Well, even though it was difficult to go 2 days with two different opponents going different ways, the interesting thing is neither one of them wanted to argue Old Testament theology with me. Now that may surprise you. You say, well, maybe the Muslim wouldn't because they just tip their hat to the Old Testament. They don't really follow it. So it might not be too surprising. But then again, since they claimed that Moses was inspired, they'd better have some explanation for these bloody rites and for this Shekinah glory and all that sort of thing. So when he refused to do that, in essence, he destroyed himself. But you'll think the Orthodox Jew, certainly he wanted to go to the Old Testament. It's at this point that a little P.S. maybe should be given. Don't be misled into thinking that Jews are people of the Old Testament. Yes, I realize there's the window dressing there. They will honor Moses. But the problem with the Jews today, even the Orthodox Jews, is the same problem Jesus had with the Jews when he walked on earth. They say they follow Moses, but instead they follow the traditions of the fathers. And I told you I was on the Dennis Prager show a couple times, where they have the Roman Catholic, the Jew, and the Protestant all there. And again, Jewish scholars appear on this program, and then this Jewish teacher that I debated at the college. And in every case, it's the same. They are interested in debating the Talmud, which is commentary upon Moses. Actually, it's commentary upon commentary upon commentary on Moses. Really is. You know, it's like Rabbi so-and-so said, which must mean, and then if that is the interpretation, Rabbi so-and-so adds to that interpretation further elaboration. And it's really a wild system, the Talmud. But that's what Jews are committed to. They're committed to Talmudic interpretation, not to going directly to the Old Testament. And I had an interesting confirmation of that during this 2-day conference they had on the people of the book at the college. We had a luncheon where we had to go and sit down with the students on the student council and the debate team and also the other people that we were debating and have lunch. And so, that's not the time to try to win points in the debate and all. We're just trying to be polite. And one of the young ladies at the table asked the Jewish scholar where I was eating about intermarriage between Orthodox Jews and those who are not Orthodox Jews, and particularly between Jews and Gentiles. So he went on to give an interesting answer as to why he doesn't support intermarriage. He talked about people who don't share a common outlook, don't usually get along, so it won't be a happy marriage. And he said, it's like smokers and non-smokers don't usually, marry and so forth. And I thought that was all interesting. And here I'm thinking Dr. Bahnsen will be the kind and charitable Christian, and I'll throw in my 2 cents worth. And I said, and I take it it's for more than prudential reasons. You don't believe that people should be unequally yoked, right? He looked at me and he said, excuse me? I said, don't be unequally yoked. He said, what are you referring to? Don't plow with an ox and an ass together. The law of Moses. Remember? And I'm not kidding. There was the biggest look of bewilderment on this fellow's face. And he thought for a minute and he said, I guess I always thought that was about agriculture. This is a Jewish scholar. I didn't do that on purpose. I didn't try to embarrass him. I was shocked. And I said, that godly Jew, Paul, said don't be unequally yoked together. That's why Christians are not supposed to marry non-Christians and so forth. And he was just bewildered by that. They are not interested in the law of Moses. They're not interested in the Old Testament. That's window dressing. That's PR. What they are really interested in is the Talmud. Okay, so keep that in mind. Nevertheless, the material inadequacy of Islam, as well as alleged Orthodox Judaism, is that it cannot deal with the theology of the Old Testament. Many times you'll using as an apologetical technique, and it's fine as far as it goes, a reference to fulfilled prophecy. The Old Testament talks about certain things taking place, specifically about the Messiah and what will happen in the life of the Messiah, the character of the Messiah. And then we look at the New Testament, and Jesus matches these things, and so there's an argument, and it is one of the evidences of the divine inspiration of Scripture. However, those who don't want to accept that evidence can easily say, well, these aren't really prophecies, or it's just an attempt to write the life of Jesus to fit the preconceived ideas and things like that. However, Jews and Muslims cannot deal with the theology of the Old Testament, not just the prophecies of the Old Testament. They can't explain why there was a temple, where there was a Holy of Holies, where there had to be blood sacrifice, the giving up of animal life as a substitute for sinners. Why is it that males had to be circumcised when they were born if they were going to be part of God's covenant? Things of that nature are part of the Jewish and the Islamic worldview because they claim the inspiration of Moses. But then when all is said and done, they aren't willing to live by the theology of the Old Testament, much less to understand it. Okay, this has been added to the lectures essentially to show you that when people appeal to worldviews which are religious, you're not on any shakier ground than when you talk to people who say they're materialist, existentialist, atheist, whatever it may be. In the end, we compare worldviews, and we're checking for arbitrariness, inconsistencies in the worldview or the presentation. You're looking at the consequences of the worldview, and finally, does it provide the preconditions of intelligibility?